So 17 participants. Okay, well, let's get started. Last time on Monday, I talked to you guys about giving me your topics. And I had a message here in the chat room that I lost. And so if you could resend it, I'll get you put on the list, and I'm sorry about that. And so let me see, where's my Zoom? Right here. I'm getting really confused about this. Can you guys see this at home? Archaeologists find rare Viking burial ship.
No, we can't.
Oh man, see? Okay, Amanda, that's why I ask. Oh man, why did this do this?
You don't want power.
I didn't think so.
No,
I want this one.
Look at green, yeah.
Ah, there it is. Great. You guys are.
Share screen and then just use.
And then
Keep it on screen.
this is where I want to be. So, and one of the things I probably need to do is when I get full screen, I lose so much stuff, but I didn't lose this. So can you guys see?
Yeah, we can.
Okay. And I think.
You already have it pulled up here.
Oh
You
man.
just click on screen and you don't have to switch back and forth.
Yeah.
And then you can just go to Chrome.
But I need that.
It's already pulled up.
I know, but where do I? There it is. So can you guys see that now?
Yes.
Okay, good. Good. You guys are saving my life. So here's what I found. It came up as a notification because I look at this stuff a lot. And this is, the headline is, archaeologists in Norway find rare Viking ship burial using only radar. And that's what I was telling you about with Sutton Hoo and some of the other artifacts that we find from Viking culture. This is discovered using only radar, but I wanted to show you a little bit more about that. First of all, it's key amongst the findings from, quote, the Norwegian Institute for Cultural Heritage Research, published in the Antiquity Journal. Antiquity would be a peer-reviewed source. So even though sometimes you find things that are on the news, like Fox News or CNN or something, New York Times, they almost always, if it comes from a peer-reviewed source, you can find that here. So you're not limited to press releases, just saying. And it is in southeastern Norway, and symbolized safe passage into the afterlife, usually accorded to the elite of Viking society. That's what I was saying the other day too. The captain of the ship, his ship would be buried in. In this one, it's kind of an interesting one because it has all different kinds of other things in the burial site. And so, can I, oh, let me zoom. But oh, okay. Here's what they identified: a farmhouse, a cult house, and a feasting hall. And that feasting hall is a lot of times represented in motion pictures. You see the long table and they bring out the roasted pig and they're all just eating and drinking like a bunch of slobs. That's what a feasting hall is. A cult house, which would be kind of a church in a sense. And so anyway, high status cemetery and settlement. And so, and over here, I looked at this. I don't want to bore you with it, but it talks about Vikings weren't necessarily blonde or Scandinavian. It's another part of research going on as we speak, genetic research, and they're finding out all of various migrations of people throughout time. And so anyway, my pitch to you is this. So can you see this PowerPoint back again?
Yes, we can see it.
Right here? Okay, good. And so my pitch to you is this, that if you're really interested in this kind of thing, this is a pretty interesting career path you may want to take. If you're interested in art, you're interested in history, you're interested in anthropology, and so on. Bottom line, is that this is a growth industry. And in the old days, it was kind of a one-off, kind of offshoot from academia. But today, we need folks from all different kinds of backgrounds, people who can write, people who can photograph, people who can do technology like radar or do genealogical searches and so on. So anyway, it's kind of a wide open field. And so one of the things, I just want to add this too, because I'm old. One of the things that these archaeologists used to employ were artists, especially artists who had great drawing skills. And if you see, before the invention of the camera, archaeologists always have pen and ink drawings of the things that they found. And so anyway, and that persisted for a long time. Even when I was young, we could get hired if we had the skill. So I want to bring you into the next chapter, chapter 12, Romanesque period art, basically. And first of all, I want to show you how the map has changed. And I talked about this, the Carolingian Empire was basically in here. What happens over time, by the 11th century, is that this consolidates. I mentioned it a few times, the Holy Roman Empire, where the governance was kind of twofold. There was an emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, and then there was the Pope. And they kind of had authority over the two worlds, the spiritual world and the physical world. And so anyway, but we have France, Spain still divided, Umayyad Caliphate, that's still Muslim Kingdom of Leon and Castile, France, the Norman Kingdom. And this is what was the remnants of the Vikings migration. And so, as I told you, they did Scotland and Ireland and England and farther west. Well, these were the descendants of the Vikings. And so they went all the way in here to this part of modern France, and that's called Normandy. And if you're a World War II buff, you will know that on June 6, 1944, that's where the Allies landed, invading Nazi Europe. I want to point out something else too, that the Norman Kingdom actually included some of this. They were descendants, and the Vikings did not only travel the northern seas, they actually came around here to southern Spain. And there's a lot of evidence that the Vikings traded with what was the Byzantine Empire, based in Constantinople, now Byzantium. And so, yeah, they were all over the place. They were seafaring people. There's some red lines in here. And I want to explain that. Principal pilgrimage routes to Santiago de Compostela. And so here it is. And these are pilgrimage routes. One of the things we see happen in Europe at this time is that there becomes another kind of consolidation of Christian practice, ritual, and belief. And one of the things that they start doing is venerating the saints and holy places. This is huge. It will be a driving force for the next few centuries. And I wanted to point out one last thing here too. You see, the Norman Kingdom becomes England. This becomes Spain and Portugal, France, pretty much the same. But this place here called the Holy Roman Empire, it pretty much takes modern day Germany, Austria, parts of Czechoslovakia, and Italy. And so, why is that important? Because of the way the Holy Roman Empire was structured. What I said, there were two kinds of governance here: spiritual governance, political governance. These countries here in the Holy Roman Empire, this stayed the Holy Roman Empire until the 19th century. And so these other places over here on the western side of this map, Spain, Portugal, France, England, you take a look at the European colonization of much of the world that begins roughly around 1500. They were able to colonize because they were organized as countries. And they didn't have to ask the Pope or anything. They did consult with the Pope. But bottom line is that they were independent countries. They could build their own armies and navies and sail out and colonize the world. In the Iberian Peninsula here, it is Spain and Portugal. And when both of these countries began to colonize South America, the Pope stepped in and drew a line right down through South America, divided it in half. Everything on the western side would be Spanish, which included Chile, Bolivia, Peru, and so on. And on the eastern side was largely what is Brazil. And to this day, Brazilians speak Portuguese, and most of the rest of South America speaks Spanish. It's all happening right here. And so, but these guys here, they didn't colonize, and that's what I wanted to point out. And then by the 20th century, you got these countries in Europe, England, France, Spain, Portugal, and they're wealthy and they have powerful armies. And places like Germany, they had been in the Holy Roman Empire so long, they didn't have any colonies. Holy Roman Empire didn't go out and colonize the rest of the world. And so this is the seeds of the two world wars that would happen. Germany had very few colonies, but Britain had colonies all over the world, as did France, as did Spain. Many had declared independence, but they were economic and military powerhouses. And so one of the things that we see here in this Romanesque period is that just libertus, I think that's how you say it, just libertus. Anyway, what's so different about this? Well, let me give you one clue. We know who did this. All the other ones are that we've seen for a long time. They say this is page 5 verso from the Book of Kells. Say, we don't know who actually made that. Don't have the artist's name. We see that for a long time. We see those Byzantine Madonnas and Christ, and we know sometimes the architects who designed the buildings, but we don't, for the most part, know who the artists are that do the mosaics and the frescoes, and oftentimes the sculpture. And so this is what you call a tympanum. And that is the archway above the entrance doors. And it's kind of the equivalent of what we saw in Greco-Roman art, where they have what do they call those? I'm losing my brain today. The pediment sculptures. And so we have an archway, and so that is a very good place to have ornamentation and decoration. And so this guy, just Libertus, was one of the great sculptors of the Romanesque period. And so this is the West tympanum. Bottom line, this is the Last Judgment. And let me see if I can zoom in on this. I can show you some of the same icons that we've seen developed over the centuries, but mostly what we see here, the halo with the cross, He's not giving a blessing, and he doesn't have the Bible in his hand.
You know, then we see like one of the figures like from the last chapter or so with the halo. Like
Oh, yeah.
Christ from like Egypt and had like the fingers like a symbol that meant something.
Yes, absolutely. And really see, there's two things going on here, though. One is that this is the last judgment. And so he wouldn't be giving a blessing. He's actually deciding who comes to heaven and who does not. And so this gesture is of judgment. But there's something else going on here too that comes from antiquity. The scale, the hierarchy of scale. So you would know just by looking at this. And one thing that was said about just Libertas, you'll see words often written in Latin in the sculpture, but there weren't that many people who were literate, and especially literate in Latin, of all things. And so only the scholars and the priest would know what this said, but he had this idea, and it's been an idea that has been part of painting and iconography through these centuries, and that is that the people could read the imagery. And in just Libertas, it's been said that he was able to make people read the stone. And so there's a great deal going on in here. And so my guess, and this is truly a guess, but these are the people that will go to heaven. And they're on his right, the right hand of God. And so this is kind of an interesting little part of this too. One of the things that starts to happen is that we start to see lay people included in sculpture. And oftentimes they will be seen as they'll be represented as though they're sitting in a box seat, watching everything. That'll continue. That'll go through the 16th, 17th centuries. But at any rate, they're donors, they're good people. And all of these are good people, and the bishop and the angels attending. And over here, not so much. And so we have the small, the wretched, the greedy, and so on. And so, the reliquary of Saint Foy, late 10th, early 11th century, with later additions, gold, silver, jewels, cameos over a wood core. And what this is, and the book talks about this. One of the things that happens in how this society practices Christianity is that they develop this ancestor worship attitude. And so how that drives things is that they want as many relics from the ancestors as they possibly can get. And so a reliquary is a place where you keep relics of whoever it's for, the statue of Saint Foy. That's her, and inside are relics of hers. It's said in the book that it's believed that her skull may actually be in here. And so that's what they do in Christianity. They want all of these artifacts tied to the faith and religion and so on. And so we have a reliquary, and it's a holy thing. And they would have body parts, they would have blood, they would have clothing, they would have any kind of thing that was connected to this holy person inside the reliquary. And so this was the official relics that in Catholicism, I should say I'm a Catholic, still do that. My wife worked for the Carmelite monastery here in Ladue. And about 10 years ago, the relics of Saint Therese, the little flower, one of the great Carmelite saints, her relics were shipped over here. And they stayed at the monastery, and they kind of made their way through the St. Louis area for all the Carmelites. And then it got sent back to France, but it's still a thing. I, being a Catholic for 66 years now, something. I remember when I was a child, we'd get holy cards, and inside the holy card would be a piece of cloth. And the piece of cloth would have been touching the relics of the saint, whose picture would be on the front of the holy card. And so it wasn't a direct relic, but it was something that connected. And so we have all kinds of relics from the saints. And so anyway, this is the interior of Saint Etienne. And it is, if some why I put this on here, it's one of the best examples of one of these Romanesque cathedrals that still has the wooden vault, the wooden vaulted ceiling. And so a lot of the cathedrals from this time were originally built with, partly anyway, with wood. And what happens is, wood dries, and the primary way in which these places are lit up, candles, stuff. Anyway, fire was common occurrence. And to some extent still is. Look at what happened in Notre Dame in France just last year. So anyway, Saint Etienne, looking east, and what I wanted to show you, or I wanted to make sure you knew, is that when we talk about these French cathedrals, many of them have the same names. So it's really kind of important that you get the plan of Saint Etienne in Vignery, France, as opposed to Caen or some other place. And so anyway, these are the early ones, and they're basically a long hall, ambulatory, as I was saying, that you could walk and pray. And those of you who are Catholic would know too that on these walls, oftentimes there'll be depictions of saints and other holy people. And there's something that they do around Easter time, and that is the Stations of the Cross. It's 14 points in the Passion of the Christ, from praying at the Garden of Gethsemane through his resurrection. And so anyway, these are aisles, etc. And this kind of architecture, it's called Romanesque, for a couple of reasons. One is it uses a lot of the same architectural designs developed by the Romans, especially these groin vaults, and they have some barrel vaults and stuff. And so that's part of it. Folding chairs. I was going to show you this too. This did not have folding chairs. They installed pews so people can, anyway. In Cardona, Spain, roughly early middle 11th century. And so that kind of gets me to another point. Why is this called Romanesque? Well, it has as much to do with the revival of Roman elements of architecture, and it's basically, with the exception of Germany, which was the Holy Roman Empire, by the way. The countries involved were the Holy Roman Empire, France, England, Spain, Portugal. France, Spain, Portugal. Portuguese, Spanish, French, Italian. Those are 4 languages derived or based on Latin. They are the Romantic languages. And so there's this kind of overlap where we're using Romantic and Romanesque kind of interchangeably in some respects. And so it has everything to do with that influence. And certainly in the middle of the continent, the Holy Roman Empire. And so here's some vaults, circa 1060. Folding chairs, what did I say? Anyway, same basic floor plan. One of the things that differed, though, in Romanesque architecture is that often these vaults were made in Roman times with concrete. In Romanesque times, they were almost always made from carved stone. And so we see this. This is what we have here is kind of a time where there is relative peace. The Vikings, their ancestors, the descendants are kind of in England and northern France and Scotland and Ireland, but mostly the ones that remain convert to Christianity. And so we don't have this kind of looting and pillaging and warfare that we saw just on Monday. And so it's a relative time of peace. I wanted to point this one out too. This is kind of a aerial view of St. Sernin looking northwest. Look at the shape of this building. It's the shape of the cross. And that becomes something else that gets incorporated in the architecture. And we still, so we see these grand steeples. And so St. Sernin, and basically, and I had this written down because I couldn't remember his name quite so much. But yeah, he was the bishop of Toulouse back when the Romans pretty much owned France, when it was called Gaul, and he was the martyr from Gaul. He was killed because of his Christian faith. The Roman magistrate had everybody who believed in Christianity killed. And so that's another thing that happens, is that along with the relics, we're putting cathedrals up on places where some of these martyrs and other holy people lived. And so it's right there. And here's that floor plan. And you see, it's the shape of the cross. Radiating chapels, these little places. You can still find them in Catholic churches too. And they may have votive candles and a statue and a kneeler and so on. St. Foy, looking southeast, mid 11th, early 12th century. And so you can see the architecture is becoming very different, much more elaborate, much more substantial than most of what we saw in the previous chapter. Europe is getting back on its feet. The interior of St. James in Spain, vaulted ceiling, long ambulatory. And this is the interior of St. Sernin, which I just showed you a little while ago. This is that. And today, in this day and age, we have electric lighting, but all of this would have been candle lit. And you can see how much they would have needed. What we have here is the same kind of setup. You see the aisles on the side, and they would be for the ambulatory that you could walk around and pray. And so one of the things that the book it talks about this one quite a bit, the Third Abbey Church, Cluny 3, looking northeast. At Cluny, that was probably the finest example of Romanesque architecture in France. And the book says so. And so we know what it looked like. But I wanted to kind of point something out here. A key word, abbey. And so an abbey is a chapel or a church that's located at or near a monastery, and it's basically for the use of the monastics, whether they would be monks or nuns, anyone who's cloistered. And so a lot of these tended to be close to an abbey. And as I was saying, in the Middle Ages, in the Dark Ages, the early medieval Europe, bottom line, they kept the abbeys kind of far away from the rest of the population centers. They needed to be away. And for the most part, those were places that Vikings and invaders of all sorts, they never found. And so they remained reclusive, but that's where they were able to do so much, have so much productivity in doing all of their calligraphy and saving some of the great books of antiquity and so on. And so they built their, at least at the time, they were building their best architecture for the monastics. And here's another one. We know who did this. Bernardus Gelunius, can't say it. And this is in Toulouse, France, at St. Sernin. Christ. Got many of the same icon imagery with the Bible, the blessing, the crown. Not so sure if he has a beard. Doesn't seem to have one. Yeah, no beard. And so you can see some of that same kind of decorative quality. This, by the way, the eagle, anybody know who that represents? St. John the Apostle. And so, at any rate, here it is, and we see, but see, this is like 1096. We're talking about 700-800 years of iconography. Even though there's some variations, it kind of stays the same. And again, so that the illiterates would know who this is. And so Christ in majesty, again, royal blue, not in this, but, and Christ in majesty, again, same icons, got all four of them here, got the halo with the cross, the blessing, got the Bible, got the beard, got the majestic robe, and so on. And again, we would have some language, written language, and then some mostly relying on the imagery. And this is in the lintel of the doorway of the Abbey Church. Again, an Abbey Church. And so we see the angels on the side of Christ. We have 6 of the 12 disciples here. But anyway, I was thinking maybe we could find that eagle here somewhere. This looks like he has some kind of bird. Anyway, John was the youngest of the disciples, and he is typically portrayed without a beard. Anyway, Christ, doubting Thomas and the apostles in the cloister of the Abbey Church, Santo Domingo, Silos, Spain. Doubting Thomas. You guys know the story of Doubting Thomas? All right. So basically, Christ reveals himself to his apostles after his resurrection. And he reveals himself to be living. And there were only 11 of the apostles, probably, no, 10. Judas hung himself. 10 of them were there, and St. Thomas the apostle was not there. When Thomas got word that Jesus was alive, he said, if he's alive, I want to stick my fingers in his side where the Roman soldier had stabbed him with the spear. That's what's going on. He's doing that. In fact, when he saw Christ, Christ asked him, would you like to do this? So anyway, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. No counting for Judas. I always get mixed up on that. I think some of the theologians do too. But I think that, never mind. And so, of the cloister of Saint Pierre, Moissac, France. And so, like I say, a lot of the best architecture was right there, not so much for public consumption, but at the abbeys, at the monasteries. And here's another sculpture. So one of the things I wanted to kind of point out here is that we have a big revival in large scale sculpture. We didn't see that in the early medieval period. And most everything we have that would be considered art is tiny, as I was saying, portable. It would be things like a purse cover or a belt buckle or a shield or something. But here we go. This is 6 feet high, so it's like a life size. It's a life size sculpture. And again, we start to see a lot of the language start to come about. But in the abbey, the monks would be literate. They would be probably very fluent in Latin and Greek. The Abbey Church of Notre Dame. This is what I was talking about. Same name, many different sites, many different. So again, 12th century, the vaults, all stonework. And so this is the portal, south portal of St. Pierre, Moissac, France. And so you have this tympanum. And I want to zoom in on that. And this is kind of typical. Things go right back to what we were talking about in ancient times. The position and the scale of hierarchy, or the hierarchy of scale, probably more correctly said. But this is Jesus. And again, here he is with the halo and the cross. And everybody else is here, and their size is based on their relative importance. And so this is Romanesque, and it's really getting very close to being Gothic. And so that's what we're doing. This is a tympanum. These are just various names given to the parts of this, the jambs on outside of the door. The lintel, same thing, post and lintel architecture. And so the tympanum is what I was saying earlier, the pediment of an archway. And so another Notre Dame, La Grande. And so this becomes actually much more magnificent. And so what we have in a lot of these, we don't really always know. I showed you a few where we know who the sculptors were, but oftentimes we never knew. And one of the things that was happening at this time, and this, you might say, incarnation of Christianity, a city or a town might dedicate most of their wealth and much of their labor to the construction of such a temple, of a cathedral. And so, and it's been said that with a lot of these, and the life expectancy, mind you, was not quite as long, but people would start as a young person. Typically men did this kind of work, a young man, and start working on this cathedral and never lived to see it finished. People could work lifetimes. And so this is yet another portal, even more developed. Don't even have to zoom in on that. It's Christ with his Bible. And so, in St. Pierre, Moissac, France. And here's our guy again. I didn't change the order of these slides. Usually I kind of group them in by um, painting, sculpture, architecture, and stuff. But this chapter was too far all over the place and it kind of bounces around. And the timeline is not that different. We're still talking about 11th, 12th, 10th, 11th, 12th centuries. It was like really kind of a short time. But here we go. Another last judgment. We saw this, the same image. It's Christ in judgment. Pentecost and the mission of the apostles. And again, Pentecost is, there's a lot of people who focus on Pentecost as the focal point of Christianity. And this is kind of an interesting development too, but what we find is that there are various places and they focus on various themes. And one of them is Pentecost, and Pentecost is where Christ and the apostles were together and the Holy Spirit came upon them and they all started speaking in tongues, and Pentecostal Christians focus on that in a pretty major way. And so even today, you'll find in a Pentecostal service, people will break out speaking in tongues. And so reason I bring that up is that what we're seeing here is kind of the beginning of the end of a single Orthodox Western church. For the most part, the Eastern church stays the way it was. It is an Orthodox church, but in the West, we start to see variations and different things that different points of the Bible, different points of Jesus's life that gets focused on. I looked this up this morning and we're talking about why is it that the crucifix is really central in the Catholic religion, but many Protestants don't, they use a cross, but not a crucifix. And it's, the answer to that was that in the Catholic tradition, they like to remind you that Christ died for your sins. And in other sects of Christianity, they want to focus on the life. They don't want to think about Christ as being dead. And so these are the kinds of things that drive the narrative as they speak. So I was talking to you guys earlier. Start off by talking about relics. And so in the late 11th century, Europeans decide to go on these wars, these holy wars, as they call them, the Crusades, as they're known in history. And what they wanted to do was to go back to Jerusalem and the sites mentioned in the Bible, and they wanted to get all of the relics they could and bring them back. And so I did a lot of searching on this. And so what they did was that they antagonized the Muslim world, which that was a part of by now. And there were radical popes that were saying they are defiling our holy land with their fake religion and stuff like that. Anyway, it was really pretty bad, pretty nasty. But what ended up being is that they created a lot of trade routes. After the Crusades were over, they had established networks along the way. And the Crusaders themselves, when they went, they built castles and buildings and forts. And this is really a fortress here built in Syria for the Crusaders. This is theirs, and it's a relic. And you can see a lot of the architecture seems like really right out of Rome, but this is a fortress. And this is where the Crusaders were based. I got another part of this. No, I thought I had another thing of Crusaders. My brother sent me a stained glass image of Louis IX, for whom St. Louis is named. He was one of the Crusaders. That's why you see him on Art Hill on a horse. He was a Crusader.
I was
And
there this morning.
what?
I was there this morning.
Oh, yeah, fresh. Yeah, good. I like that. That's a great place. But what my brother sent me was a picture of a stained glass of Louis IX and bringing back the crown of thorns from Jerusalem. That was the kind of stuff that they probably really didn't find, but they thought they found. It was the kind of relic that they wanted to bring back. And, even to the point now, a lot of this has been satirized. Monty Python and the Holy Grail, for example. Yeah, that's a quest for yet another relic, the chalice, the cup that they drank wine from at the Last Supper. Here you go. So that's a relic thing. And so here's our guy, Gis Libertus, Suicide of Judas. And we see here, these are bad angels. They are Satan's angels. And so Eve, and here he is, Gis Libertus. And what I wanted to show you too, just kind of briefly, is that the idea of illuminated manuscripts, that persists, that it keeps going. It's going for really many centuries, and maybe only slightly declines when Johannes Gutenberg develops the printing press. And the first thing that they really print a lot of, guess what? Bibles. And so anyway, but the illuminated Bible and the illuminated manuscript persist. I want to show you this. I always like this. A long time ago, when archaeologists find stuff, they mark it with a number or something. Yeah. Saint Mark, one of the four, writer of one of the four Gospels, and this is from France. I put a star by this one, partly because I thought this was kind of an interesting and unique representation of a dragon. And this is a knight fighting dragons. St. George was reputed to have slain a dragon. Dragons are something that kind of enter into Christian lore, Christian mythology, Christian teaching at this time. And so, yeah, we have a knight fighting the dragons. Here's an example of the kind of painting that you would see. This is in Saint-Savin. This one, Christ in Majesty. We see this, the peace the book, the halo, the robe. But look where it's at. Museum of Fine Arts, Boston. So it's not just ancient cultures that have their artwork kind of hauled away wholesale. You know, we've seen that. We saw that with virtually every culture. They'll take a whole wall or a whole building and put it up, take it away. This Madonna and Child, and the book talks about this one too, as this had the usual Christ iconography. This is Madonna and Child. And he would have the Bible in this hand and be giving the blessing with the other, but the arms are broke off. But it's called the Morgan Madonna. And it's a gift of J. Pierpont Morgan. Yes.
I've always wondered why sometimes Mary was called Madonna in sculpture and art.
Yes, that's a good question. And I think there are two answers, and it depends on how you see things. But Madonna is, like Donna being like highest, like a belladonna or a Madonna, or, you know, highest in of womanhood. And a Don, this is still Italian, Latin stuff. A Don would be the highest male. So Madonna, kind of like that. The other is that they talk about this as a Madonna only when you have all of these other elements, like the throne and the Christ child. And the throne here is, you know, it's kind of a dual purpose sort of thing. One, it elevates her status as Queen of Heaven, but the other is that it's kind of developed out of the idea that the throne stands for wisdom too, the throne of wisdom. And so, and a lot has been said over the centuries about Christ that way. He's the king, Christ the king in a throne, but does the throne mean royalty or does it stand for wisdom? And you could probably safely say both. And so, yeah, with that, anybody know who J. Pierpont Morgan is?
Oh, JP,
Yeah,
The bank, he's like
Alex, yeah.
the bank company.
Yeah, the bank, he was one of the great financiers of the Gilded Age. He was the guy that, he was the big banker, bankroll people like, bankroll railroads and Edison and other things, yeah. Made a lot of money. And so when you're that rich and you can go over to Europe and buy these things and then give it to the Metropolitan Museum, they'll put your name on it, the Morgan Madonna. And the book talks about Germany as, although it's not exactly a romantic or a Romanesque country, Germany is heritage-wise kind of separated out from that, but they do have some of the greatest examples of Romanesque architecture. And the Speyer Cathedral, the inside of this, just magnificent, the vaulting, this is in Italy. Italy does a lot of stuff too. What we're talking about here is what's actually going on in the Holy Roman Empire and St. Ambrosio, Hildegard. This is a reproduction, detail of a facsimile of a lost folio lost in 1945. I'm hoping that someday we'll find it. And it could have been destroyed in the war, or as they're finding out that a lot of people just kind of, when they were in the midst of war, would kind of send valuable things home. Hey, honey, I just sent you a big package. Yeah, it's a Rembrandt, you know. Seriously. And so, Hildegard of Bingen, wanted the Abbey of St. Hildegard seat, an abbess, a holy person. What we find here too, I just wanted to point this out as a last point. What we're starting to see, I told you guys the other day, I think I talked to you about how women were blamed for original sin. What we're starting to find come in this Romanesque period is that holy women are starting to be acknowledged, and Hildegard of Bingen is one of them. Saint Teresa of Avila, other holy women of the time making their mark. So, I talked too long. I'll see you guys Monday, and a week from today is quiz 5. I'll give you a quiz before you go.
Wait, is it like the following week we go virtual, not next week, but the week after?
That is correct. You guys are moving out and not coming back until after the new year. I'm sorry to say, but I don't. I
All
know.
right, thank you.
Yeah, thanks you guys.
I think we're just gonna keep going.